What's up, marketers? Today I'm going to talk about my predictions for 2024, and we're going to go ahead and dive right into it. Now, the first thing that I'm predicting is that brands are going to start focusing more on brand than they are on performance. And what I actually mean by this is that brands are going to start focusing a little bit more on brand building as opposed to performance at all cost. What's up, marketers? Cheers. Wow, I just sprayed my entire screen. Today we're gonna talk about my predictions for 2024, and I think a lot of them are going to surprise you. Now, the first one is gonna be, I think that brands are actually gonna start focusing a lot more on brand versus performance this year. And more specifically, what I mean by that is I think brands are gonna be a lot more focused on brand building over the long term as opposed to a performance at any cost model. Now, when we think about it, D2C or direct to consumer is a channel. You are selling direct to consumer. That's not a full-fledged business model. It is simply just a channel. And I think right now that question is actually being challenged for brands who want to grow sustainably. For a long time, I think the playbook was, yeah, we're a direct to consumer business model who uses Facebook to grow profitably. And I think a lot of people are starting to question that profitability now because honestly, direct to consumer, AKA Facebook ads to grow your top of funnel, isn't nearly as profitable or as sustainable as it used to be. And something that I think a lot more people are going to start leaning into is this idea called performance branding. Now, Nick Sharma actually very quietly launched a new agency that dives into this very idea of performance branding, which what I imagine this is going to be is a brand that starts to build itself upon learnings that it gains from using paid dollars to learn about what their consumers actually want and digging into the psychology of that, and then actually building the brand on the back end for that, and having a much slower approach to growth than a lot of these meta-first performance-minded brands had in the past. I think a really interesting comparison for this is going to be, look at the brand Jolie versus the brand Glossier. Now, what's really interesting is I actually went to a beauty branding meetup recently, and it was actually being run by people who were some of the founding members of Glossier, and they were like, oh, Jolie doesn't have a brand, but it's super profitable, it's super performance driven. And that got me thinking, like, okay, why is it really clear to me that the perfect middle ground for a lot of brands to grow sustainably is going to be at the intersection of brand and performance? I feel that a lot of performance marketers are like, oh, well, like it's, someone says it's on brand, then it's, then I don't want to work with them, it's too complex. But for brand marketers who are working with performance marketers, oh, if it's not on brand, then they just really don't understand it, it's not going to work. Like, I think there actually is a point where both of these people are right, and no one wants to admit that. And what I think is really interesting too is a lot of performance agencies are really starting to wise up to this, like Raindrop Agency, who actually just created a 12-month brand accelerator. And essentially what they've learned is, hey, what it takes to get a brand from $10 million in revenue to $100 million in revenue is a brand that is driven by really strong human desires, not just arbitrarily testing things on Facebook ads. So number two, I think the focus is going to be a lot less on Facebook ads, but this doesn't necessarily mean that I think people are going to be arbitrarily diversifying their channels. Like, I don't think people are going to spend more on TikTok this year, but I do think this is going to be the year that people are going to explore other growth hacks or growth levers outside of paid social. So they're going to think a lot more broadly about, okay, how does the product fit into this? How does the product features fit into our growth? How do different SKUs or launches fit into our growth? How do press and celebrities fit into that growth? I think that this is going to be the year that a lot of brands take a step back from the meta ads growth lever and really think a lot more about what it's going to take to make a sustainable growing brand over the long term. And number three, I think that AI is going to take over a lot of the menial operations aspect of running a business, but brands are going to hire a lot more for strategy. So in many ways, 2023 was the year of AI. It was the year that ChatGPT really disrupted a lot of the ways that we think about work in general. And I think that the fear initially was that a lot of people thought it was going to steal jobs. And what's really interesting about that actually is now I see, especially a lot of jobs on LinkedIn, a lot of what's being actually pushed out there are for things that AI is going to have a really hard time to actually take over, like strategy and like creative. So I think that brands are going to be hiring a lot more creative strategists, but for things like operations, media buying, really systematic and assistant-based work, that kind of stuff is going to be taken over by AI completely. And I really do think that the people who learn to use AI in their jobs, those are going to be the people that get hired and hired again. It's not that AI is going to take our jobs. It's the people that know how to, intertwine their output with AI. Those are the people that are going to be taking our jobs. And number 4, I do think that the TikTok shop arbitrage is going to die down in 2024. But I do think a lot of platforms are going to try to replicate its success. So to quickly explain what TikTok shops actually is, now brands have the ability to have storefronts that are directly based on top of TikTok. And what really makes this so successful is the TikTok Creator Affiliate Program. And this allows creators to tag brands and products directly in their creative or directly in their TikTok posts. And essentially this cuts down the amount of time that consumers take from discovery to landing page and actually buying the product. So it almost becomes a one-click purchase essentially when discovering the product and then actually clicking to buy. However, I do think that this is an arbitrage moment, which means that right now there is a lot of money and a lot of perks to be gained by being one of the first to utilize this. However, this is something that's really not going to be a long-term gain, and I see this dying out quite a bit in 2024, probably in the later part of 2024. So if you haven't explored TikTok shops for your brand and you want one of those arbitrage 2015 Facebook ads type of moments, this is really the point that you want to get at. A big reason why I think that this isn't going to work past a few more months is honestly right now TikTok is supplying coupons for users and for brands. So TikTok themselves is saying, yeah, I'll give you 50% off this product. They're paying the brand that difference in the coupon, but the users are also getting that 50% discount while the brand is still making that money. And essentially what they're trying to do here is they're trying to get people in the habit of buying TikTok shops. But a negative that I actually saw recently on Twitter is that a lot of creators aren't actually authorized to be publicizing these brands and these products, and they're still getting through the cracks. So now brands are like, oh, hey, a lot of this content is off brand, or we don't actually align ourselves with that creator, so we're trying to take it down. Now, those are some of the negatives, but I do think there's a lot of positive things here. Number 1, I think that this simplifies the brand-creator relationship. It enables more creators to make money, so they are a lot more incentivized to make content for brands that they really believe in, which results in better creative, and creative that performs better for the brands. And in some ways, that content and creator alignment is more in sync, but in many times it isn't. Sure, it trains creators to be more versed in performance marketing, but I do think that there are a lot of downsides that brands are starting to see where they don't really have the control over that creator narrative, which could be a downside for some brands. On the positive, the money has been really life-changing for some creators, but on the negative, the brands aren't really in charge of their brand voice and the way that creators talk about their brands, which could potentially be a negative. Now, what I think is going to happen in the future is that creators are going to start being able to make that content directly on the platform, and advertisers are going to be able to natively choose that creative to then put ad dollars behind. They're not going to have to go through the process of manually selecting creators and sending briefs and yada, yada, yada. TikTok is essentially training creators on how to be a lot more performance and direct response minded. And I think platforms are going to really benefit from that. But I do think that it is kind of at the detriment of TikTok, because now TikTok users are starting to follow the For You page a lot less because they feel like they're being marketed to. So while I do think it's a negative for TikTok, I do think it's ultimately going to be a positive for a platform like Meta, who can learn how to utilize creators to cheaply and more natively make that content and incentivize them to make that content so advertisers can put their ad dollars behind it. I hope that makes sense. And number 5, I think this is one I definitely experience more specifically myself, is I think that in 2024, less people are going to become full-time creators, but I do think more professionals are going to start making that content. And I think that in many ways, 2024 is going to be the year of the B2B creator. We're also seeing places like Cisco and LinkedIn, they're starting to offer resources to their employees to learn how to create more content like the top creators. And I think that we're going to see that become a line item in a lot more jobs moving forward when, hey, you're working for a SaaS company, you're working for a big tech company. Becoming a content creator for these brands is something that's going to be required more, and especially required on more of your personal platforms, which does kind of become a conflict of interest. I'm not going to lie, as someone who has done it myself. I think that a lot of times, it does put a lot of time and effort to make content as the person and not as the brand. And the perk, right, is like for the person making the content, they're always going to have that relationship with the user regardless of where they go to. Whereas if they were making it for the brand, it just kind of lives and dies with the brand, and honestly it's not that strong. I even see this on TikTok a lot for brand-based content or brand-based profiles. A lot of times they have a lot fewer followers than even their founder accounts, and that's because people want to focus on the individual. They really want that personalized story. So I think that personalized story, and especially for professionals that work in sales and marketing, it's going to become a lot more intertwined for them to start making their own content and start having a bigger presence on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and potentially even video-based platforms like TikTok and YouTube. And I think that's just something that we'll see written into a lot more job items moving forward. So I'm really curious what you guys think some of your predictions are for 2024. Let me know in the comments below, and I will see you in the new year. Cheers.